Before we talk about the content of Tzur Mishelo, there are several aspects that we need as a preamble, let us say, an introduction. One, the first thing is where does it come from? We don't actually know who the author is. There are many Zmiros like this. There's no acrostic giving us a name, even if we wouldn't know who that person is. However, it is extremely old in some of the earliest Kisayat it's found. And different Mefarshei Siddur and so on ascribe it at the earliest to the base Medrash of Rashi, so the Talmidim of Rashi. Others ascribe it, say it was written by one of the Balei Tosos. Other people say it was a student of the Balei Tosos. So either the Talmidim of Rashi, the school that developed out of Rashi's school, or the students of the school that developed out of Rashi's school. Somewhere in there is where it was written. So very early, between 8, maybe 750 at the newest. This could conceivably be to as much as 900 years old, maybe even 1,000 years old. So it is one of the older of the Zmiros. The content parallels Birkas Hamazon, in that the first verse is parallel to the verse Brach where God sustains the entire world, and which we say was written by Moshe Rabbeinu, because in Moshe Rabbeinu's time we were sustained directly without necessarily land, because of the falling of the man. The second bracha, Nodilcha Al-Aretz Atova, we give thanks for the good land, is similar to the bracha of thanks, the second bracha of the Birkas Hamazon, which we say was written by Yehoshua. The third and fourth stanzas are comparable to the third bracha in Birkas Hamazon, Rechem you should have compassion on your people, and Yebane HaMikdash, and the you should build the sanctuary. And both of these ideas are found. The third bracha starts Rechem, and of course ends Uvnei Yerushalayim, so it's on there. The fourth bracha in Birkas Hamazon is Midrabanan. The first three we say are from the Torah. The fourth one is parallel, is the bracha Tov V'Hameti, but Chazal created a longer text for it here than in other places. And this bracha was established when those that died in the Bar Kokhba revolt in Beitar, the Romans finally allowed them to bury, and there was a mace, and the bodies hadn't decayed, even though many years had passed between the time they were executed and the time that they were allowed to be buried. And because of this miracle, Chazal established the bracha Tov V'Hameti, which is the fourth bracha. It's not only one that we say when good things happen to us, but it's also the fourth bracha in Birkas Hamazon. Of course, the nusachos of those, the texts of those are different, but nonetheless, that's here. And for whatever reason, the Paitan, the author of this Zemer, this song, didn't include it within his work. It does parallel Birkas Hamazon, and the Shulchan Aruch says that there is no exact text to Birkas Hamazon. As long as you have these contexts, these ideas in order, you fulfilled your obligation of saying Birkas Hamazon. It's in the Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim Kuf Pei Zayin. So there have been those who say that if you say it in this way, you fulfilled your obligation from Torah law of saying Birkas Hamazon, and then you wouldn't have to actually bench afterwards, even Midrabanan, even from the rabbis, because they didn't establish the exact nusach for this. They said you have to say these brachas in this order. And since we said things in this order, it would fulfill that obligation. Because of this, the Vilna Gaon argued against singing this Zemer. As an aside, you may note the way it's printed is the way most people are nohig to sing it, is it's the last one of the Zmiros for Friday night. Whichever order and however many Zmiros are in the different things, it's always the last one for Friday night. So as the last, it comes immediately before benching, and that would then create a problem. It might create a problem for eating after it also, because if you say you've already benched, then does it require another bracha, or does not require another bracha? This was the argument of the Vilna Gaon. Having said this, the vast majority of the Acharonim, for some reasons that some of them we'll talk about, argued that no, in fact, it doesn't fulfill your obligation. For instance, in the second bracha, we have to mention the bris, the covenant of circumcision, and the covenant of Torah. And in the bracha that we have, we say al brischa shechasamtu v'yisreinu v'al Torah secha shelamadetanu, and the covenant that you sealed in our flesh, and the Torah that you have taught us, and neither of these things are mentioned. Therefore, one cannot actually fulfill the obligation, meaning it is, even bizmanenu, a free form to a certain extent, and that there are different texts that even Chazal suggested for it, but it's the obligation of giving thanks to God isn't only for the land, it's also for the bris milah, it's also for the Torah. And so if you don't have all three of those mentioned, you haven't fulfilled your obligation. If you haven't fulfilled your obligation in bracha number 2, you haven't fulfilled your obligation in any of the brachos, therefore it would be fine. The other interesting argument is that mitzvahs tzrichos kavana. There is a debate from the Gemara on, famously stated by the Balatanya and Reb Chaim of Volozhin, as to whether mitzvahs tzrichos kavana, whether you have to have the intent when you're performing a mitzvah to perform that mitzvah, to fulfill the mitzvah, or if you do it without intent, have you still performed the mitzvah? Now, certain mitzvahs have a bracha for them, and so it sort of puts your mind in the sense that, yes, I'm fulfilling mitzvah now. Other brachas don't have, other mitzvahs, don't have a bracha associated with them. For instance, tzedakah, and there are various reasons given for this. And so the question is, if when you do those, have you fulfilled the mitzvah without saying the bracha? And most authorities feel that if you perform the mitzvah without saying the bracha, you've still fulfilled the mitzvah. Many times the Shulchan Aruch will say that if there's a doubt concerning whether you fulfilled the mitzvah or not, and so you're doing it now, that brachos einu ma'akvos. The bracha doesn't prevent you from performing the mitzvah. You've still performed the mitzvah without that. So do you still need kavanah, or do you not need kavanah? Meaning, if you hold that you need kavanah to do a mitzvah, then many times if you do things as many people do by rote, especially think of some people, Rachmana litzlan David, they just quickly go through it without having time to properly think of the words. It's interesting this is a statement from Rav Hirsch that very much appeals to me, that the words of Tehillim and the words of Tefillah are called paz, the finest gold, like a fine gold bead, and each one is handmade and different. You would examine each one and appreciate it as it passes by. So to every word of Tefillah, every word that you say of Tehillim, every word of praise, every word of prayer, every word of request to God, every word of communication with God is supposed to be the finest spun gold. One should think about it, so concentrate on it. But if one doesn't, one still fulfilled his obligation. The Gemara paskins, for instance, by Tefillah, if you say the Shemona Esrei without kavanah, even on one bracha, you're supposed to go back. And then later on, the authorities as well, if you don't have bracha kavanah for the first bracha, you go back. And then the Bali Tosos end up saying, if you didn't have kavanah the first time, you're not going to have kavanah the second time, so forget the whole thing. But so there is an acceptance of doing things without kavanah, and in general, we paskin that mitzvah seinen tzrichos kavanah. Mitzvah doesn't require kavanah. I remember once reading a sefer on the laws of serving in the Israeli army, and he was dealing with an issue whether we say a hechsher mitzvah is like a mitzvah, that when you prepare to do a mitzvah, the preparatory acts, for instance, I have to build a sukkah to have a sukkah to sit in. So is building a sukkah also a mitzvah, or only sitting in the sukkah is the mitzvah? So if you hold that building the sukkah is also a mitzvah, and there are opinions in the Gemara that you say a bracha over building the sukkah because that's also a mitzvah. So basic training is part of the basic mitzvah. So if you didn't do an exercise in basic training with the kavanah, with the intent that you're doing this to fulfill your obligation to defend the Jewish people, then maybe you have to repeat the exercise. So when I was reading this, I said, yeah, someone goes to his drill sergeant, and after a 5-mile run with full pack, 10-kilometer run, 20-kilometer run, so, Sarge, I didn't have the right kavanah during that run. I think I should do it over again. But in general, as I said, we say that mitzvahs einam tzrichos kavanah. There is an exception to that. A bracha, which is a prayer of God, really should have kavanah. And therefore, many poskim say that if you didn't have kavanah for berikas hamazon, you could still have to say it over. The Mishnah Berurah, when he considers Kiddush Friday night, where there's a Torah obligation on both men and women, but most women don't daven Friday night. So he says a man fulfills his Torah obligation of Kiddush when he says in the Amidah, Baruch atah Hashem in Kaddish Shabbos, blesses God who sanctifies Shabbos. It's the same bracha as you say at the end of Kiddush. So he says at this point a man would have a difficulty fulfilling his wife's obligation in Kiddush, because he would have a Torah obligation, his wife would only have a rabbinic obligation. He would have only a rabbinic obligation, his wife would have a Torah obligation, and a rabbinic obligation cannot relieve someone of the liability of a Torah obligation. So the Mishnah Berurah says to avoid this problem, that men should have the kavanah not to fulfill their obligation in Kiddush when they daven the Amidah. And everyone agrees if you have a negative kavanah, meaning I'm not doing this for this purpose, then you don't fulfill it. So everyone would agree that if when you sing Tzur Mishelo, you intend not to fulfill your obligation in Berikas Hamazon, that could be sung before Berikas Hamazon. This is an introduction to the summer. B'ezras Hashem, next week we'll have time to look at all 4 verses at one time, not divided up into 2 separate shirim. Everyone should have a wonderful day and an elevating Shabbos.